Hello, my name's Sean Walton and I'm a lecturer at Swansea University where I'm running the Web Application Development course. Now this video is going to be a really quick kind of overview of ASP.NET MVC 5. So on my course we do web application development and the toolset we're using is .NET MVC. So this video is for anyone who has a rough, knows what a web application is, but is interested in using the MVC framework. And what we're going to do is a very, 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 very basic database interaction website. I'm not going to do any real coding myself. It's all going to be done for me by Visual Studio, and then I'm going to look through the code that Visual Studio generates and show you how that's working. And then after you've watched this video, you should then have enough knowledge to go watch some of my more advanced videos, for example the to-do list tutorial where I recreate the Trello to-do list using this framework. So let's first start going over what is MVC. So MVC stands for Model View Controller, and it's a pattern for developing applications. It separates your UI into three main aspects, or separates your application into three main aspects. The model, which in our case is going to be a set of classes, and these describe the data we're working with and the rules for how they can be manipulated. You then have the view, which defines how the application appears to the user. In our cases, that's going to be the HTML, the actual website we see in the browser. And then the controller is a set of classes which handle communication between the user and the application, and kind of controls the overall flow, is doing all of our logic, and it communicates between the view and the model in a way. So what we're doing is we're separating our concerns here. So all of these three, the model, view and controller, are all separate, and people can work on them individually. If you've got a web designer, they can work on the view, and it doesn't break anything. It's not like you can imagine you have a PHP mixed with HTML page, and your view and controller, your logic might be in your HTML page, which is kind of messy because you've got all this stuff mixed together. Whereas this separates the concerns. You have your controller classes, which are very separate to your view, so your designer can work on your view while you're working on the controller, and everything still works. Excuse me. So that's the basic pattern, which is important to know before we go into this. You might have already known that, but I just want to go through it. So in ASP.NET, this kind of pattern is enforced when you create an MVC project, and it really pushes you into using that pattern. I mean, you don't need a framework to use that, but you'd have to be very strict on yourself to make sure you don't, your controller logic doesn't start leaking into your views, which is really easy with something like PHP. Right, so enough theory. Let's get into here. So I'm using Visual Studio 2015. This is free to download, as everything, in fact, that we're using today you can just download, and it's free. So the thing to remember is when you download and install it, to make sure that you're installing all of the web tools that you need. So customize the installation. Visual Studio is really good actually at allowing you to install extra things if you've missed them. So don't worry too much if maybe you've got an install from somewhere else or something. So I'm going to start a new project. Right, so we want Visual, so C# web, and we're doing the .NET web application. And then if you don't see these templates, this is kind of what I was talking about, that you can upgrade things if you forgot to install them. You can click here and you'll go online and you'll find the templates. So I'm going to call this project basic. And just because it's a very basic project, I'm creating a new directory and creating a Git repository. So here, I'm selecting MVC as the core template for this project. You can add folders and references to things like web forms, which is kind of an older way of doing things, or web API, which is allows you to write controllers that don't necessarily return views. They're kind of think of like RESTful applications. And if you don't understand what that means, don't worry. But it's just to illustrate how flexible this is. Now, you can also change the kind of authentication you want. The default is what you almost always will want, which is the standard behavior you expect from a web application where a user signs up an account and those accounts are stored with hashed passwords on the server. For this example, I'm going to do no authentication because I want to have the project completely empty when we start, because it'll be a bit easier to teach you this. But I doubt there's any case where you would have no authentication. Maybe there is, but I think it's unlikely. Particularly if you're on my course. If you're on my course and doing the coursework and you click no authentication, that isn't good. You need to have users in. So we're not going to host in the cloud. That's something you could do if you wanted. I think you can. There is some like free stuff you can do there. If you're a student, you can sign up for Microsoft's... I've forgotten the name of it now. But they have a scheme where if you're a student, you can download things and you get a bit more access to Azure, I think. So anyway, I'm going to click OK. And this is going to create us a basic project. And then I can show you what's going on. So the first thing that pops up, this is just like a help thing, which will take you to a bunch of tutorials on Microsoft's website. So you can get rid of that. I mean, there's actually a file here in your project, so you probably want to, like, you won't want to keep that in your project. But I'm not going to mess around with it now. So the basic template is set up with a bunch of folders. And this whole framework is built around the idea of convention over configuration. And what that means is that it has a convention that if you follow it, if you name your classes in a certain way, then you don't have to spend ages tinkering with configurations. It will work as you expect it to. So what do we have to start with? Controllers, we have something called a home controller. Models is empty because there's no models. Views, we have one that says home and one that's shared. Now, shared, as you might expect, are kind of layouts. So where should we start? I'm going to just run it to show you what you've got default. So if I click run here, it will build the application and run it. And what it's doing is it's building it, it's starting up a server on your machine, and then it's going to browse to your localhost with this port number here that will be different on different machines. And so this is what we've started out with. Basically it's a website. There's no interaction there's no user interaction really, other than I can navigate to different pages, but I could have easily done this with a bunch of just static HTML files. So let's turn this into an application. So I'm going to start by defining a model. This framework, it's really difficult to pick where do we start with these things. So I'm just going to dive in and make a model. So I'm going to right click on my models folder. And remember, model is going to define the data in our application. I'm going to click add class, because our model is going to be defining a class. I'm going to call this class Pokemon. And I'm going to add it. So what we're going to be making, we're going to make a Pokemon database. We're doing Pokemon because I'm bored of watching tutorials that are always employees and that kind of thing. And I happen to have a stack of Pokemon cards on my desk for no good reason. So that was, I saw them and I thought, right, we'll do that. So our Pokemon class, what we're doing is we're building a class, a model, that's going to end up being, going to end up having a database with a bunch of Pokemon in it. So there's some things we want to give this class, thinking that it's going to be in a database. And the first thing is like an ID. So you're saying int ID, and that's going to be the primary key for this class. So it's important as well that when you're building this, you make all of these parameters public, and you give it some getter and setter. And what this is going to do is we're actually going to make Visual Studio make the database for us using something called the entity framework. And it's going to look in our classes, and it's going to figure out, it's going to see ID and see it's an int, and it's going to be like, right, okay, that is going to be the primary key. And then it's going to make this data access layer, which will enable us to query databases programmatically. So it's a language integrated query, I think. Link. Is it link or something? I can't remember how to pronounce it. But so it's important that we set these getters and setters, and we set things to public. Otherwise, that system will not work. So what else do we want? We want public string name. So I don't know if it's name or species. That's an interesting question, isn't it? I think it's probably name. Like, could I have a ratata that's like named something different? We're going to stick with name. We're not going to worry too much. So name, we're going to have public string type. So is it water or fire or what? That kind of thing. Well, should we have? Let's have a public int HP get set, and I think that's pretty much it. That'll do for now. Actually, let's do another one. Public string. We're going to call this awesomeness. Is that spelled right? Is awesomeness even a word that you can spell wrong? I don't know. No, apparently. Oh no, it's because I haven't get set. There we go. Okay, so we've made our class here, which is our model, and it's got a bunch of parameters here that we'll be able to set, and a bunch of variables. And what we want to do is, in this application, we just want a basic interface to just add Pokemons to our database, edit them, get rid of them, that kind of thing. All done through a web, so through a browser as part of a web application. So this is our model. Now I'm going to build the solution, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the entity framework to build all of our controllers and databases and stuff that we need for this particular model. And that's good. What we're doing is we're taking a code first approach to this problem, rather than us like creating a database first, then writing code that interfaces with that database. We're writing code first, we're defining our classes, and then the database is going to be built from that. The way we do that is we want to add a controller. So I'm going to right click on controllers and do add controller. And we want an MVC5 controller with views using the entity framework. So I can click add, and we want to pick our model. If you hadn't built this, it wouldn't be appearing here. So our model is this here. Data context. Now this is something that's referring to our database. We're going to define a data context, and that's going to create a class that defines that context, where in that class there's going to be some way of connecting to a database. So we're going to add a new one, and we're going to call it Pokemon. Can you call it Pokemon's context? Or Pokemon DB. Let's do that. If I have spelled Pokemon wrong, I am sorry. I haven't. That's correct. Right, add. So we're going to generate the views. Don't worry about these two things yet, because we're trying to look at the basics. These are slightly more advanced things. So the controller name is called Pokemon's controller. Notice how it's plural. Okay, that has an important meaning. Is that Pokemon is a single entity of this class, and Pokemon's implies there's a collection. So don't name your class Pokemons. You name it the singular, and that's part of this convention over configuration thing I said about. I click add. It's going to build the scaffolding. Okay, so what has it built? Firstly, in our models folder, we can see it's built this Pokemon DB context, which inherits the class DB context, or as the base class DB context. And this class is this kind of data access layer that allows us to interface with the database programmatically without writing out queries ourselves. So you can see this is, remember I said language integrated inquiries, language integrated queries, that's what this link is. So we've got public Pokemon DB context, name, the base here is the name is Pokemon DB context, and it's the name of our database basically. And it will create one if one isn't currently existing when we run it for the first time. What eventually, as you get more advanced, you'll start using things like the migration, database migrations, which is something you should use, which allows you to like seed data. But for now, don't worry. So this context has in it a public DB set of Pokemon called Pokemons. And this basically is the table in this database which is going to have our Pokemons in it. If we, say for instance, also had a class, say trainers, so Pokemon trainers, we could have another table in here. Instead of creating a new database context, we could select this one that we just created and it would add another table called trainers. And that again would be a DB set of whatever the new model is. And then any kind of relationships between those things, the entity framework would figure that out and set it all up properly with the right foreign keys and all that kind of stuff. So it created that. It created the Pokemon's controller. And let's have a look what methods are in this controller. Let's just go through it. Well, the first thing you'll notice is that we're actually instantiating a Pokemon DB context. This. And this DB here is basically our database. So when this controller is run, the first thing it does will be connect to the database, and it will keep this variable that will then be used down here to access things. We then have an index class method, a details method, create, edit, and delete. Okay, so these are kind of things that are used in these other methods. So our basic CRUD, right? Create, read, update, delete. So those basic operations. It's also created a folder called Pokemons with a view for each one of these methods. So let's open index. So this is the view index that goes with this controller action index here. Now I think the best way to show you, the best way to move forward here is to first show you the application running, and then I'm going to come back to the code and show you what's going on in the code. So if I click play, now we didn't add any links to navigate to these pages, so we've got to do it manually. So I'm going to, because we call it it's called Pokemon's controller. If I write Pokemon's, now the way that MVC works, or the way ASP.NET MVC works, is that you have your URL, which is given a path. So you've got your path here, Pokemons. This path doesn't point to a file. So you might be used to websites where the path at the end of the URL is actually pointing to a physical file that's on the disk of the server you're accessing. That isn't what happens here. What happens is that this path is interpreted by a routing engine. It looks at that path and it has a routing table which was generated when the application first started, and it says, right, I've got the path Pokemons, and it looks down the list down the table until it finds Pokemons. And then it follows a set of rules to figure out that if it's Pokemons here, that means I need to instantiate a Pokemon's controller and run, in this case, when you have it's just Pokemons and nothing else, the default is to go to index. It then runs the index method. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to have this open here so we can see the website on our left and the controllers here. So that's what it's done. Furthermore to that, the view it's returned is Pokemon's index. Again, using the convention. We didn't have to configure it. We didn't have to tell it to do that. It just did that as part of the convention. You can change that convention if you want. You can actually override the routing table and make it do what you want to do. There are reasons why you might want to do that. In this case, we don't. So I can now click Create New. Pokemon, I can type in, let's say, Krabby. Type is a water Pokemon. HP is 50. Awesomeness, pretty awesome. Something else, notice this. This is actually, it knows, because we set this in our model as an int, we've got the right controller for int. Now if I click create, it's in our table. Let's create another one. Let's do Ratata, if that's how you pronounce that. Type colorless. I think colorless is a type. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Awesomeness, sort of awesome. No, not so awesome. Sorry, but he's just a rat. Okay, create. So there we go. So we've got our Pokemon. We've got our list. This is in a database. If I really want to, I can look in my Server Explorer. I can connect to it by double clicking, and then I can click somewhere. I'm sure I can click. Oh, our tables. Let's look at our tables. Pokemons. Show table data. I right clicked there, and there you go. It's in our database. And notice how it's setting. It knows the ID. When I created this, it didn't ask for the ID here. It's figured out that the ID is the primary key, and it hasn't given me a form to put in. So what we can do as well is I can click edit, and that edits this. I can click details, which gives me details, and I can delete it if I want to. I'll delete the Ratata because it's not so awesome. There we go. So that's the functionality we have. Let's now try and figure out how this is all working from in here. The first place to start is our index. So when we go to the index, when we go to Pokemon's, let's get rid of stuff we didn't need so I don't keep clicking on the, no, we'll keep, right. So Pokemon's, and like I said, this is just in case you don't believe me, if I do index, right, it's the same page. So it's calling this function. The routing table has worked out that Pokemon's -index, it needs to instantiate a Pokemon's controller and then run the action index because that matches this thing here. And it's returning an action result, which is view, and then it's giving it db.pokemons.toList. So it's looking in our database, it's getting the table Pokemons, and then it's converting it to a list of Pokemons and sending it to this view. So this is our model. Okay, the model in our controller is being sent to a view, and this is the view. And this is written in something called Razor. So we're using C# here, and this is written in like a Razor scripting engine, which is really good. I think it's really good anyway. So what's going on in here? The first line says @model, and it says IEnumeral basic models Pokemon. So IEnumeral is like a generic list of Pokemon. Let's have a look back here. So we're giving the view a list of Pokemon. And here we're defining that the model this view should expect is a list of Pokemon. Okay? So that's how this knows what to expect. That's called strongly typed. So we're sending this from our controller, and the view knows what to expect, knows what type to expect. Now if we come down here, we've got an action link here that is corresponding to this, create new. I'll come back to that. Now we've got a table, and so the first line of the table is the headings, and we've got, this is called a HTML helper, and it's saying display name for model.name. So what it's doing is it's looking at our model. It knows what the model is because we defined it here. It's looking at name, and it's saying, right, what is the display name for name? And if we wanted to, we could actually add a data annotation and give it a different name here. We could write display name equals something, or whatever. But we're not going to do that now. I just want to show you the basic kind of what's going on. So that's what this is doing. It's looking up any data it's got on this particular entity. It's using that information and then making this display name name. And if it doesn't have any extra metadata, it just uses the name it's got. And it's doing that for everything. It's not doing it for the ID because it knows that's a primary key, and we don't want to display that. We wouldn't necessarily want that. You might want to, and then you could just add it yourself. And then it says for each item in the model, because remember, this is a list of Pokemon. It's looping through, and it's displaying, similarly to the HTML display name for, this is display for the item. So it knows that name is a string, so it's going to have an appropriate way of displaying a string. It knows this is a number, it's going to have an appropriate way of displaying a number. If you go through my to-do list tutorial, this comes up when you have a display for a Boolean, when you get a checkbox. Okay, it figures out what's the best way to display this. Notice that this loop is in C# because when we have an @ this is what's so good about the Razor is we've got HTML here written as normal, and then this @ tells it, right, okay, I want to write some C#. You write the C#, you get to here. Once you write this left arrow, it knows, oh, there's HTML, so I don't need to, I'm going to switch to HTML. Then down here, you put the @ again, and you switch into the C#. And so it's displaying for this particular item. And again, we're going down this whole list, and same idea. For this next bit, I'm going to add another Pokemon. Right, so let's is type colors again. HP is 50. Awesomeness. It's a bird. Okay, so the reason I did that is because of this. So we've got another action link. So these are the edit, details, delete. So I'm going to start. This one's easier to kind of explain. It's simpler. So here, an action link takes it takes a number of arguments, but in this version, the first argument it said is create new, which is this here, is the string that the link shows you. And the next argument is the controller action we want it to perform. So in this case, it's create. So remember when I clicked create new, it took me to the create. So it ran this action. Okay, and it did that. So you can imagine in the future when you're developing your application, you might move some files around. Well, you don't have to come in here and fiddle around with like a hard-coded URL. It's generating the correct URL from your code. It's looking at your code and doing that. Now down here, we've got edit, so it's calling the edit action. But there's something here. It says new ID item equals item ID. So let's have a look. More tools, developer tools. Actually, yeah, we can see that anyway. If I look on this URL, look in the bottom left corner, down here, it's got edit, but you can see there's a number 1 added to the URL. That's the ID. If I go on this one, it's 3. And that's the ID of this row. So this first one, 1 is the ID of this element. And this one, 3 is the ID of this element. And if I click on edit, I get the correct Pokemon. So if I go to my controller and go to edit, I can see there's an int here. It takes an argument ID. And if it's null, you get an error. Let's just show that happening. Okay, a bad request because we've not given it an ID. Otherwise, it finds in our database, remember DB was our database, db.pokemons, the Pokemon's table, finding the one with ID number 3. And it returns that as a Pokemon. If it found one, well, if it says null, we get HTTP not found. So let's do 50, because there isn't one at 50. 404 not found. 3. Otherwise, it returns view Pokemon. So it returns this Pokemon to the view. So let's have a look at the edit view. So the edit view, the model it's expecting is a single Pokemon. And then, using HTML helpers again, it's beginning a form. And you can see it's... Don't worry too much about the details of these helpers. Like, that's something you can look up and learn. I just want to show you the basic kind of flow that's going on. It's going down. We've got the first one here, label for model.name. Okay, so it's looking for the label for the name here in Pokemon. Then it's saying editor for model.name. And that is basically this. So where it says editor for, notice how the number is different because it knows this is an int. It's making the correct editor for that particular int. And it's building this form dynamically based on this model. And it's putting in the current values in there as well. And that was passed, the Pokemon number 3 was passed to this view by the edit action. And then notice there's a second edit action. And what this one is for is if I click save, I wonder if there's a way of showing you this. More tools, developers tools, resources maybe, timeline. Okay, I'm going to click save. Network, sorry. Is that right? Okay. Right, so we have a post here. What this is the HTTP. This is like our HTTP requests. So this is the last one I did. Is I clicked on that. I did a HTTP post. So I'm posting information. It was from the form. Request headers. if I can see. So form data. So here, do you see we've got the form data here? This was what was sent to the server when I clicked send. The ID3, name Spiro, type colors, HB50, awesomeness, it's a bird. So that was sent to the URL, that URL. So we sent this data to Pokemon/edit/free. The routing table would have seen that I just pointed at the screen, you can't see that. It would have seen that URL routes to an action, this one, and it would have also seen there was some form data sent with it, and it would have included that as an argument in this action. Because it had more information, more than just an ID, it's picking the kind of overloaded version of this method. And in this case, something really clever called the model binder is recognizing that these values match what we expect a Pokemon to be made up of. And then it's taking this data there. If the model state is valid, which means if it's a valid Pokemon, then we update that Pokemon in the database, and then it says redirect to the action. Okay, so redirect to index. So it's redirecting to the index action, so it's going up here. This is probably doing a backwards routing, so in fact, if we look, 302 found, I think, is a redirect. I could be wrong. Don't worry. Let's have a look. Response codes 302, I think. Yeah, it's a redirection. So 302 is I found something, but it's redirecting me. I'm trying to see if we can find where that redirect is. Yeah, locate. I think the response. So this is the response that we saw. There we go. Do you know what? It's easier to see when you don't have it past. So the response was 302 found, but it's 302, which means redirect. So it's redirecting it to Pokemons, which is what happened. And then we got to Pokemon, so we got 200 OK. That's it. And then the response is here. So yeah, so that's how that's working. Again, it's doing checks to see if it finds... Oh no, don't worry, cancel that. So yeah, I wonder if we can do an invalid one. So let's do edit. Let's oh no, I can't even... Oh no, I can't. That's weird. Oh, E, because you could do 1E9. But this is already not letting me type in text. So I can't do an invalid. I can only type in a number. So I'm going back to this. Actually, what if I leave this null? HP is required. There you go. So it's telling me immediately that you need to give it health. Because Pokemon without health is dead. So I don't think I'm going to go through any more of these other actions. I hope that is kind of clarified a bit of how this is working, the flow that's going on. That's the kind of thing I wanted to get out of this little thing, was to show you how the flow is working. In terms of, we have a model here that is being passed around using our controller, and our views are interpreting that data and displaying it as HTML. So all of this is actually, like, this is happening, this is being rendered kind of on the server. So that's why you don't end up getting these sent to your browser. You actually see the proper, the strings that you expect in there. So that's what the HTML helpers do. Yeah, so hopefully that's helped a little bit. And what you should be able to do now is really, this is enough information, I think, for you to be able to access or to follow the video tutorial series I did, where I used this framework to build a to-do list, very much like the one in Trello. So I'll show you. So slight spoilers. So I recreated this, right? Nice to do list. Okay, so I recreated everything here pretty much. I got pretty close to it, I think. I'll let you be the judges to how well I did. Okay, if you have any questions, even if you're not on my course, then you can ask in the YouTube comments. If you're on my course, you can ask me by emailing me or, however, coming to my office in the office hour. Follow me on Twitter at Dr. Sean Walton, and again, you can ask questions there. If you have any requests for other videos, if you specifically want me to go into something in more detail, let me know. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Yeah, bye.